rescue one up on scene. I'll be assuming Caroline Street Command. I got a 2.5-story wood occupied multiple dwelling. I got heavy fire from the second floor, Charlie side. I have an exposure on the Delta side. We have one line stretch not in operation yet. Primary searches are underway. Status of the fire is doubtful. One passing command. I'm on the first line. Speed advised. We're on speed. 2-story wood frame. I got heavy fire from the Alpha side.
Welcome back, Valley Chief fans. It's David Lenart here. Next exciting episode. This is part 3 of the River Restaurant special. I have our first repeat guest. So for those of you who listened to our first episode with Captain Mike Witek of the Storm Ambulance Corps, Mike's been, well, let's just say Mike joined the Volunteer Fire Service in the 70s. So what year? 76. So by the time the River Restaurant came along, he had about a decade of experience. And I really wanted to get Mike on to talk about it because Mike was one of the people that was intricately involved in the rescue. So of Michael Ippolito, the son of the owner. So that if you listened last week to my father, he talked about the attempt to come in from the side, the tunnel, and that they couldn't tunnel in from the side, so the second group tunneled in from the top down. Mike was part of that team that was tunneling in from the top down. So it's really weird because I feel like, I don't know, do I introduce you again? Like, how does this work? What do you think?
I don't know. It's your rodeo.
Right. I mean, you're my first repeat guest, so I don't know if I have to.
So repeat.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. So I'll let Mike give you just a quick bio again.
No, like Dave said, Captain Mike Witek from the Storm Ambulance Rescue Corps, joined 1976 and been around since then.
All right. So Mike, 1985, or excuse me, 86? 85. Woo. 1985. At that point, were you an officer then or no? No. So I got to look and see who the officers were back then.
I'm not sure.
But walk us through the day. Like, where were you when it came in? When you got there, like, where did you? You have to remember, being volunteers, all these guys showed up. The oddity was my father showing up in the ambulance or in a truck. Most people showed up in their personal vehicles back then.
So at that time, myself, Tom Finucane, Joe Antonazzi, we were all working for Sealand Environmental. We were, doing tank entries, cleaning tanks on a daily basis. That was just what we did, spill cleanups and so on. So we were coming back, I think it was from Stratford, and that's when the explosion occurred. And stuck in a little bit of traffic. It took a little bit to get there, but obviously you knew what was going on. You could see the plume, you could see that dust that your father mentioned, that Doug had talked about. It was just odd, but whatever. We get there and a pile of rubble, fires going on, a lot of chaos, mutual aid showing up from everywhere. I can remember Mike Grant and Billy Seward just standing there. They had their bell caps on with their long coats, and but going around and around, we knew that we had victims in there. There was spot fires everywhere, little pop explosions, if you will, because there's still pockets of gas going in there. And that hampered, when we realized that we had people trapped and were going in there, that hampered some of the rescue operations because, you'd start, you'd pull out, you'd pull out, you'd hear the gas explosions going off. But when we were looking, we're at one point, I remember shutting down any machinery that was running because I believe it was Dave Manley, who was one of the Derby police officers, but he had some construction experience, and he actually commandeered a front-end loader, and he was starting to peel back some of the debris. And I remember, we would try to shut down as much equipment as we can to listen. In those days, you didn't have sound listening devices that you could put into a pile, right? So,
Yeah, no, like you again, and one of the things I think I keep going back to is, this was obviously almost 40 years ago, and how far the technology, I mean, you think about an event like this happening nowadays and the technology that would be brought to it.
Oh, yeah.
Like you said, the listening devices immediately, first thing
you call a
USAR team, yeah. You'd have dogs, you'd have drones, you'd have, you'd be
thermal imaging.
Right. I mean, so this was done by a bunch of, working class schleps back in the 80s.
Well, we took what we did on a full-time basis and applied it to our part-time job of firefighting and rescue.
Right, and that's the other thing is back then, a lot of guys were still in the trades. A lot of guys were still working, with shovels in the ground and stuff like that, where you don't see that as much now.
Like I mentioned, Tom and Joe, you said we were entering tanks on a daily basis. That was rare in the fire service at that time,
right.
But that's what we did. But so back to that, we shut down some of the noise a little bit, and we could hear, and and we kind of pinpointed we could hear screaming. So there was a crew. I think there's a couple guys from Derby, a couple guys from Ansonia, and whatever. They tried to get in from where I think it was Artisan Press.
Yep. Yeah.
So we tried to breach the wall, and they had to go, like you mentioned earlier. They'd go in, debris would fall. They'd have to come back out. It was tough going. At that point, I'd come back around to the top of the pile, and we shut down. We could listen again, and I'll never forget the screams from Mike. He was screaming that he was burning, and we were trying to figure out what was going on. So, ironically, those screams helped us pinpoint him. Put us almost what we believed to be on top of him, and we determined later that he was screaming that he was burning, but we figured it was probably steam or some hot water from the fire lines that were trying to put out the fires at the same time. So we got on top, and we as best we could, and we started tunneling down.
You keep saying we.
Me, I remember Finucane was there. I think Jimmy Salamarca was there. Joe Antonazzi. Again, we were all working locally. There was a few other guys, and I can't remember them all, but I remember those guys, vividly. And so I started tunneling down and moving some bigger debris, and I started getting like into a rabbit hole, if you will. Getting narrower and narrower. But at one point,
when you say tunneling, you're hand digging.
I'm literally on my knees. I first started on my knees, and I grab something, I'd hand it back. I grab something, I'd hand it back. Before I know it, I'm thigh deep in this hole, upside down, shoulder width apart, and I can remember handing cups and saucers, like they fell off a shelf. And I kept handing them back. I'd hand them back up, and I can't remember who. I think it was Finucane grabbing them, and we just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And then, based on his voice and our contact with him, we realized that we're in the right spot. We're on top of him. And as I mentioned, we worked for Sealand at the time. We would do tank entries, and our air supply was a portable. It was an air compressor in a cage. We would plug it in. That would be our main supply for air, and then we would have the escape bottles. So we had the idea of, we called the van back, because that was on Derby Ave at the time. We called the van back, and I remember I was afraid I was going to get in trouble from my boss, but we cut the quick connect ends. I remember snipping the end off, and we snaked the hose down through the debris, and we were just pumping, trying to pump fresh air. Yeah. So we were doing that while we're working, and then I can remember, I believe it was a refrigerator, or some big white, like a refrigerator type box, and that was pinning or preventing us from gaining complete access to him. And the two tools I remember using was a vetter airbag and a bottle jack. I remember using a bottle jack sideways and pumping it and moving some of the debris, and then that actually gave us, we were able to see his hand, and that was our first physical contact with him. So once we got there, we cleared up a little bit, and then at that point, I think I'd been upside down for like an hour. So we rotated out, and just kept removing the debris, cutting, pushing what we needed to push, and eventually we got him out of there. So,
and how do you remember how long?
Oh boy, I want to say in excess of like a couple hours. Yeah.
Yeah, like 3 to 4 hours.
You know what? Yeah. Because it was daylight when we made contact with him, and it was dark when we got him out.
And now, like, again, 1985, we didn't have caches of equipment like we do now.
Oh no.
I mean, you think about the limited equipment we carry on the rescue. I'm sure it was even less back then.
It was brains and brawn, more brawn than brains. But yeah, like I said, a bottle jack. bottle jack was our best friend at that point. It was small. I can get it into tight spots, crank it, push something back, wedge something in it to hold it open. You know, it was a flipped version of shoring, if you will. You know, until we can get them out.
So how'd you get them out?
We ended up just, I think, slipping a board down and you know, like you do in a wreck pin job, you get them out the best you can, and you got them out. Yeah.
And then after you pulled them out, at that point, did you guys, like, were you know, aware that there was nobody left, you know? Or...
We were pretty confident that at that point, any contacts we made were going to be a recovery and not a rescue.
Now, one of the things I talked about too was the fact that, well, you know, the victims were related to one of the members of the Storms.
Pogo.
Yeah. Were you guys aware at that point of all that, or
we had knowledge. We didn't know who and where. You know, we found out pretty quick. It was, you know, yeah. It was...
So yeah, I mean, I had the opportunity to speak with Pete, you know, and I mentioned it that we were doing the podcast, we were doing the episode, and he thanked me and said, you know, it's nice that people don't forget, and that it keeps the memory alive. And I just think, you know, the fact that you guys, like you said, back then it was just brawn, and you guys just tunneled and bottle jacks and really improvising the whole thing and being able to pull him out of that hole is just such a tremendous, you know, rescue effort for even nowadays.
Yeah, it was tenacity, you know, just teamwork amongst all the guys there. You know yourself, even this day, the desire to get the job done, and then when you know it's one of your own, you know, you have that, you get amped up a little bit on that.
Now, did you guys have problems with the fire? Because I know that's...
We had to stop periodically. We had like cease all operations because things were popping and burning here and there. At that point, later in the evening, it wasn't so much as like an open burning fire. It was, you know, pocket fires here and there.
And then how long did you stay on scene?
Well, I stayed there probably till like wee hours in the morning. I shot home. I hadn't been home yet from work all day. I shot home, took, you know, quick shower.
The great days before cell phones, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't text
exactly.
and say, "Hey, I'm on a..."
Yeah. And then back at it, you know. And then at that point, it was just, you know, basically peeling back the rubble and you know, keeping things wet so they didn't light up and so on. And you know, and doing the rest of the recovery efforts, which, you know, that didn't happen quickly. You know, we had to piecemeal.
Right, it took several days.
It did. As you know, it's dump a box of matches on the ground and try to pick one out of the bottom. You can't, you know.
And now, when you were arriving, you know, like, what point did you get a full view of the scene?
Oh, Route 8.
Yeah, okay, so you came...
Oh, yeah, coming down Route 8, you looked right over, and you just... It was right there in your face.
Okay.
Yeah. It was like, you know...
Where'd you park?
Holy shit. You know?
Yeah. Where did you... Do you remember?
I think I parked at Caroline Street. Yeah, somewhere near the lumberyard.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
So...
And then ran up, yeah, because like, you know, you said earlier, the pockets, I remember seeing the archways and you know, what was exposed after that.
Now, how do you think if a similar incident happened today, how do you think it would go? Do you think that I hate to say, we've built too much of a system?
So, again, you're to coin one of your phrase, the freelancing. There was a lot of controlled freelancing.
Yeah, but that was that.
You know,
but
that's how you rolled.
Right. But in the 80s, incident command really wasn't a thing like it is nowadays. You didn't really, you know, it was the norm to operate that way.
Yeah, kind of. You're right. It was. You know, there was no. I don't want to say there was no command structure. There was command structure, but you know, everybody back then, everybody knew. You knew who the players were. You knew what you had to do, and you just did it. And that was that.
That was that.
You know?
And I mean, like, right.
We always had good guys. You trusted everybody. You know, that's the thing.
Right now, I'm painfully sitting through the NIMS 3-400 curriculum, and obviously the whole time this is ringing in the back of my mind because I think about, you know, nowadays the paperwork giant that would be an incident like this, and what would be required in operational periods, and are you filling out the right forms and all that, you know. And I think Another thing, too, about it is we mentioned the USAR team, but those things don't happen immediately. You know, a lot of departments put this, oh, if something happens, we're just going to call USAR, right? Or you know, and there are a lot of departments that have in their mind, oh, well, if this happens, well, we're just going to call these guys. But people, a lot of, you know, I feel like people set themselves up for failure because they're not prepared for that first, you know, 2 hours of operating on their own.
We were digging before any USAR team would have even been mobilized.
Right, because I mean, so for those of you, if you're listening out of state, Connecticut has an in-state USAR team. It's not a federal team; it's just a state team, but it's headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut, the state's capital. So from Derby to Brainerd Airfield is, you know, especially on a Friday at Christmas time in rush hour traffic, it would have been an hour and 20-minute ride to get those assets down here. You know, and I know, again, you guys lucked out because of the relationship we had with the New Haven Fire Department. So Chief Grant and Chief Seward were there, you know, very quickly with guidance. And nowadays, I think that would probably be one of the things, too. You'd see us immediately. If we had an incident like that, obviously, we'd mobilize the Valley. You know, fortunately, I think one of the things nowadays we're much better at is asset or resource location. You know, if we had an incident like that now, getting shoring, getting heavy equipment. Yeah. You know, now I think we're
much more aware of those needs
too. Yeah. You know, and again, I think about the machine that an operation like that would be.
Yep.
Now,
and you mentioned like Mike and Billy from New Haven. It was nice having they weren't on the pile; they were on the street side. But they were looking back, fresh set of eyes. You know, look out for that, watch for this. How about this? How about that? And that was a huge help because you know you get that tunnel vision. You get you get those blinders on. You know,
right. And you're bringing. I mean, at that point, their experience level, you know, was through the roof. I mean, they were day in and day out at the school in New Haven, so that you really couldn't have got two better, you know, candidates to come up for that moment.
And you know, when I tell you the story about the guys digging through the wall on the side and us getting to the top, you know, that I said that in a matter of 5 minutes, but it wasn't 5 minutes. It was painstaking. It was frustrating. At times we could hear him screaming, and you know, like I said, you just want to get in there, but you don't know where to go. You know, so there's a lot of angst in that, whatever I'd say, hour before we were able to really pinpoint and you know hover over and start digging down.
Now I don't shot in the dark here, but what was it like for the next couple days, weeks around the firehouse and around town? Because again, it was a you know, and I can't even say around town. I'd say around the valley because, you know, we know Aunt Sonia, the Shortle family, was obviously devastated by this. You know, what was it like around here after that?
That explosion touched so many people in so many different ways. Whether it be, you know, on a minor level of like, oh man, we were going to have our Christmas party there, to Jesus, that was the mother of one of our guys, you know, and the other people in the valley, we all knew him. I mean, Pop Shortle, you know, he worked Griffin Hospital at nights as an orderly, and you know, so it touched everybody in some way. And then, you know, until the investigation came out, you know, all the chatter about the gas leaks and stuff going on and all that, it was just it was somber, you know, to say the least.
Yeah, because it's talking to Joe about it a couple weeks ago. Joe actually told me that Len had lunch there that day because he worked at Farrell's, the iron foundry.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, right down the street.
Right down the street. And he said, like, you know, at lunch they used to all walk up and get pizza quick there.
Yeah.
So
and like you mentioned in your earlier podcast, Main Street back then,
right? It was
jamming. It was nothing like it is now. I mean, we're kind of turning the corner there, but man, there was anything you needed, you got on Main Street.
Now thinking about the Main Street area, I mean, so you had the River Restaurant on Caroline and Main. On the other side of Caroline and Main, you had the Pioneer Bowling Alley. Were you there for that fire? No. Was that before you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And then how about
my next would be Interstate Florist.
Okay,
up and around the corner.
Up and around the corner.
Yeah.
How about Halleck? Were you there?
Yeah.
Halleck.
Yeah.
That's
us on the.
Well, right. I have to tell you that. So you know, everyone knows my grandfather was a fire photographer for the local paper, and he did all the breaking news photography. Those two pictures of the loading dock are probably two of my favorite pictures that he ever took. You know,
Joe and I, we left the school late that night. We drove past it, and we we actually saw wisps of smoke, but we thought it was the Chinese restaurant next door, and didn't think anything of it. We're at Hart Johnson's was open at the time. We would sit there and have coffee a little late in the evening, and then lo and behold, that comes out as a working fire, and we get there, the place is ripping. You know,
it was
everybody ended up with Permatex all over their coats.
Right, because it was it was a warehouse, right? A furniture store.
Hardware, furniture, everything, you name it. Yeah.
So that was right around the corner.
Yep. Literally 1 block away.
1 block away, yeah. So I mean, like again, the Valley has seen, as we talked about the River Restaurant, we talked about Whole Die.
Yeah.
You were in for that, right?
Whole Die, yep.
Yep.
I came in the year after BF. BF was 75.
You know what's actually funny about Whole Die is I said to my mother one time that I remember going to the Whole Die fire, and my mother says there's no way because the Whole Die fire was in 1980, and she's like you're too young, and I said to my mother I could tell you how I know. I remember that we walking down North Ave and Chris Robinson carried me, and then she says to me, "Oh my God, you're right." She's like Chris Robinson and us walked down. So I said to her, I actually remember going to that, and I maybe it was a traumatic event because there was such a big fire and we had to evacuate and go to my grandparents, but I do remember that.
And I'm not saying other towns have experienced the same
Oh,
thing, but back then we'd have a multiple alarm fire. It seemed like every month.
Right.
I joke, I call it redevelopment. But Sons of Italy, near behind the post office, I remember that burned on a hot hazy night. There's just Caroline Street. We had some good ones.
Yeah, I think another little featurette I might do on Caroline Street. We had a fire in Derby in 1991. It was a large, old style New England row house. It was ordinary construction. It would claim the lives of a mother and 2 children, and it was I not to say use the pun, but it was a firefight. Like you guys that were there.
We're trying to make the second floor to where they were,
right?
And the staircase was burnt out because the fire started in the basement.
And again, another time where you guys made a Herculean effort to make a push. Now that we got a little off topic,
Yeah, sorry.
That's right. It happens. Closing thoughts on the river. What?
For guys in my generation, we'll never forget it. I agree wholeheartedly with you that at some point, maybe after it's all done up down there, that we should put some type of memorial there. Those people gave their lives to the Valley. I think we owe it to them not to forget them and to educate the younger folks coming up or whoever. Just, this is part of our history. Just like you see the plaques from the 55 flood, here's the water level from the 55 flood. That was a catastrophic event for us here. Not as, catastrophic as the flood, obviously, but important to us here locally.
All right. So, Mike, thank you for being my first repeat.
My pleasure.
So, and you're still not my first real guest, though.
Yeah,
well,
we'll talk about that later.
So,
yeah. I'm no, Chief Toad, but
he's a ringer. You got to bring in ringers.
That's all right.
So, the first guy I brought in was more like a test to see if I could figure this out. Then I had to start bringing, So, thanks for listening, everybody. Next week will be our final episode on the river. So, a couple more guys that I got coming on, they're going to touch on it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot me an email. And until next week, have a great night.